Hey guys, want to learn how to avoid capital gains with some advanced structures? Well, stick around, we're going to dig into it right now. So let's start off with sharing a little bit about what capital gains is, how it works, just at a high level, so then we can get into some really advanced structures in a minute. So capital gains is where you buy an asset and sell an asset. It's the difference between those two. So let's put some numbers around that. So if you buy an asset for, let's say, $1 million and you sell it for $10 million, your capital gains would be $9 million. Now, depending on how long you've had the asset and which state you're in, you will be taxed a different amount, but you'll be taxed on that $9 million. Let's kind of jump into it, and I'll do a quick screen share to help explain. So let's say you buy for 1 million and you sell for 10 million. Your cap gains is going to be $9 million. Now, that $9 million can be broken down into two things. The first one is going to be short-term or long-term capital gains, right? So short or long. And then also, depending on which state you're in, so that plays a big part as well. So depending on which state you're in will also have a huge implication. Maybe you're in Florida or Texas where there is no state capital gains tax, or you're in California where it could be treated as ordinary income and it could go all the way up to 36%, just depending on your scenario. So there's a lot of different factors. This is a more advanced video, so we're going to dig into some more structures and tools that you can use. If you want some basic information about learning capital gains and what would apply to you, we have other videos that show that, but we're going to get into really advanced structures right here so you can get the most out of this video. So flicking back to the screen here, we can see that there's multiple different factors. So if we just use some simple math, just so we can have an example, if we just use 30% as the number that we're going to assume, that would mean, so let's just put cap gains tax rate, and this will be different everywhere. This is including state and federal together. Let's assume it's 30%. So that would mean we would go $9 million times 30%. So that means you would have a $2.7 million tax to pay on your transaction. So that would leave you with net profit after tax of 6.3 million. So there's a big chunk of that gone to Uncle Sam in this scenario. And we're going to show you exactly what to do and the different types of things you can do, because obviously there's many different ways to skin a cat. We're going to go through the best case scenarios, the worst case scenarios, and then all things in between, just so you can know what is on the menu of options for you to pick and what's the best scenario for you, whether that's moving to a different country or state, or whether that's just structuring yourself in a more efficient way to help you get more bang for your buck. And all of these strategies, you've got to really be planning ahead, and it's really important to set yourself up before the transaction happens, because with everything that I talk about, you're going to see on the sliding scale, we're going to go from best to worst or worst to best. We're going to show you that the longer you leave it to plan, the more you're going to pay in taxes. So why even do that? If you know you're going to exit and you know you're going to sell, you're in those talks, you're in the optimization phase for your business, you also need to optimize for taxes as well. It's really, really important. We're going to get you the most bang for your buck and be able to optimize your own business so that you can not pay Uncle Sam very legally and totally above board. So kind of let's jump into it, and we'll show you what that looks like right here. So we can see the share screen right now, and let's go and add an arrow and some text so we can see what we are going to do. So if we start with just a simple scale and we can go best and worst. So in the best scenario, we'll have over here. And the worst, we can go over here. So what are some of the blocks that we're going to use here? So when we think about the best case scenario, what does that look like? That means no tax. And then the worst case is the most tax. Oh, if I can spell. There we go. Okay, so when we look at the worst case scenario, what does that really look like? So that is going to be self-employment tax is probably going to be up there with the worst of it. That's pretty bad. So if you're paying self-employment tax, then you're going to be taxed at a pretty high rate. So we want to make sure we're keeping away from that. Another one would be ordinary income is pretty bad. So let's just put that in here. And what else is bad? Some corporate tax. Let's talk about corporate taxes. So if you've got a C Corp as an example, then you run the risk of being double taxed. So if we go C Corp, because you would then pay corporation tax and then personal tax on top of that. So that could be a really big problem. So that would be double tax, and that would be corp and personal. So we've got that's probably as bad as it gets, I think, from the standpoint. So when we look at the worst things you can do is if you're paying self-employment tax, we want to get away from that as much as possible. Or if it's corporate, a C Corp, so that means you could be double taxed on that, and that's corporate tax and then personal tax as well. So we want to make sure that we're not doing that, right? Then ordinary income, I think, has got to go in there. If it's earned income, then that would go in there. And I think then actual capital gains tax would fit in here somewhere. And then that obviously ranges from 15 to 37%, as we mentioned. Then there's other strategies like Puerto Rico as an example. We could put that in here. So Puerto Rico is good because that ranges from 0 up to 4%. But you got to live on the island. So depending on what you want to do, and if you're really ready to commit to that, it may or may not be a good idea. Then we've got other good things that you could do with Roth IRAs. And that would be self-directed, I would assume. But that's not the best one because you can do your investments out of those. You can pay the tax up front or deferred, just depending on what mechanism you're using. But it's not going to indefinitely defer the tax like a complex trust. If you have a complex trust structure and it's set up right, then that's going to be the most powerful tool that you can use in order to reduce and indefinitely defer your tax situation. So when we look at this type of chart, there's many different ways you can do it, but it all really starts with planning ahead of time. So when we look at the most taxed areas on the screen here, and self-employment, we got C Corps, we got ordinary income. It can get really high. You could pay a 50% tax rate by just doing these things in the wrong way. Whereas on the left-hand side of the screen, you can get down to 0 in Puerto Rico if you're willing to move there, relocate, live there for the amount of time that you need to qualify. And then on your ordinary income and earned income, you're going to be paying 4%. That's really good. But we have a lot of clients that move from Puerto Rico back to America because they can't handle it. It's a very different lifestyle. It's a small island. It's just being hit by a hurricane. There's always lots of things going on there. The power's spotty, the internet's spotty. You might have young kids. You can't take your whole family with you. There's a million different reasons. But for some people, that might be a good fit. So I want to make sure that you can see the full spectrum of things. With the IRAs, oh, I misspelled that. So let me fix that. With the IRAs, directed, self-directed, pay the tax early, pay the tax deferred. So many different ways to skin the cat here, but ultimately you can control that retirement account. And pros and cons, you've got to look into that in terms of having access to those funds, reinvest in it. Do you want to reinvest it? Do you want to hire someone to reinvest it? Do you trust them? What do you want to go into? That's a whole hour-long discussion in itself. But I personally use the complex trusts, and we use that for most of our clients as well, because when the complex trusts are used correctly, it's going to give you so much more flexibility and freedom to not only avoid the capital gains tax, but also have control over those funds to reinvest however you want. So if, let's just use real estate as an example, if you're using, a lot of our clients are big real estate developers. So let's just flick back to the screen. And if they have a home, let's say they have a home. So we'll do a home. And again, I do not have any art degrees. So let's call that the home. And they want to flip that, right? So if they want to flip, like most real estate developers do, then they're going to run into a scenario like we mentioned before, where they're going to have usually short-term capital gains or long-term, just depending on how long that development took. And then a lot depends on which state they're in. But generally speaking, they're going to pay a lot of money in that. But rather than, if they've got the house, and let's just say the house is here. Oh, where's my pencil not working? Give me a second. Okay, so let's say the house is here, and they flip that house, right? So we're saying they're going to flip it. If they own the house as an individual, then they're going to be potentially paying 37% on that. And we don't want that, right? So what we would do in this scenario, we would say, okay, you've got the house, but rather than you owning it, why doesn't your trust own it? Or an LLC? Because that way, the trust can own the LLC or vice versa, however you want to do it. But it takes it out of their personal name. So therefore, it reduces the risk and the target on their back also. So there's many different things going on here, but levels and structures of privacy, protection, but also tax protection too, because then you don't have to pay 37% because it's not coming to you as an individual. If it's owned by the trust, then what we can do is, if in the right type of trust, this can't just be any trust. Again, we've got different videos talking about simple trusts versus complex trusts. And what you can do in the right type of trust, which is the complex trust, is allocate that to corpus. So the capital gains, or what would be classed as capital gains, would switch over cap gains. Oh, sorry. Would go allocate to corpus. And that would allow us to indefinitely defer those capital gains so that you can then reinvest that money however you wish. And the beauty about reinvesting that is it's better than a 1031, because in a 1031, you have so many restrictions, right? So you don't have to do a 1031 where you're stuck for 180 days because you've got to find as-like property that you're going to invest in. It's usually going to be a higher value because you want to roll all of those capital gains in. So you don't have to worry about any of that red tape if you have the right trust structure set up, because the trust structure is the one doing the investing. It's not going to be you as an individual. It's going to be on behalf of the trust. And that's a lot of good benefits from that. Not only do you get the asset protection, the privacy, the secrecy of it being owned by a trust and nobody knowing who the beneficiary of that trust is if it's run correctly, but you're also going to get a reduction in taxes, because if you allocate into the corpus of the trust, which just means principal of the trust, then you can reinvest that however you want without these types of restrictions that you get in the regular 1031, or without having to still pay the tax in a DST or a CRT type trust. There's other options out there, but generally speaking, what we found is the complex trust is definitely the most flexible and efficient way to go about that, and that's what we use. That's what I use personally as well. So complex trust is the way forward in that regard, in this scenario, because there are other scenarios, and again, we don't want to just be giving you one thing to look at. There's many different ways in which you can get your taxes down, but with this complex trust, or a good complex trust, when you operate it correctly, that's going to give you the best win, where you can totally mitigate your taxes without having to relocate to Puerto Rico, without having to get a self-directed IRA and either pay that tax up front. But you can control all of that without as many restrictions. And I think that's the key one, is that when you have a complex trust and you're running it correctly, the restrictions go down a lot. So I hope that has helped. And if it has, and you would like this guide, you can get access to it by scanning the QR code on the screen right there. And that will give you access to a tax savings calculator. And what the tax savings calculator will do is you can throw your numbers in there, and it can give you an estimate on how much you could save on taxes if you're set up the right way. And then you can go on and set up a free call with us, and we can go over those numbers with you and figure out what the best structure is for you. So if you scan the QR code or hit the link below, you can get to that tax savings calculator, and we'll take it from there. All right. Thanks for watching. Take care. Bye.